Police in Hollywood, Florida are holding a news conference where they're expecting to announce a break in the case of Adam Walsh, who was murdered back in 1981, and his case unsolved, perhaps until now. Let's listen to this news conference.
To apologize for investigative mistakes that transpired during the early years of this investigation. Although I was not a member of the Hollywood Police Department when this tragedy occurred in 1981, I am nevertheless...
Mid-morning, August 1981. Two men are fishing along a canal near the Florida Turnpike when something pale catches against the reeds. From a distance, it looks artificial. A mannequin, maybe. For a moment, both men want that to be true. It is not. 16 days earlier, 40 miles south, a 6-year-old boy stood beside a video game display inside a department store. His mother told him she would be nearby. He looked up. "Okay, Mommy." Then he turned back toward the screen. Within minutes, he was gone. What followed would become one of the most consequential missing child cases in American history. There would be delayed action. A crucial encounter inside the store that remained publicly obscure for years. Suspects who led investigators nowhere. The name of one of America's most infamous serial killers. Another man who confessed, recanted, and confessed again. Possible evidence that was photographed but never developed. Physical evidence that was later lost. And 27 years after Adam disappeared, police would finally close the case. But no one would ever stand trial. A warning before we continue. This documentary concerns the abduction and murder of a child and includes distressing details. Viewer discretion is advised. This is Final Trace. The cases that do not end when the file closes. On July 27, 1981, there was nothing unusual about the day ahead. 6-year-old Adam Walsh was preparing to begin 2nd grade. He lived with his family in Hollywood, Florida. People who knew him described a child who could be shy around strangers, but comfortable and talkative at home. He liked baseball, he liked drawing, and, like a lot of children his age, he was fascinated by video games. That morning, his mother, Reve Walsh, had 2 errands. First, register Adam for school. Then stop at the Sears department store inside the Hollywood Mall. She had been looking at a lamp and wanted to see whether it was on sale. They entered the store together. Inside the toy department, a demonstration Atari 2600 console had attracted a group of older boys. Adam wanted to watch. The lighting department was nearby. Reve told him she would be only a short distance away. Then she stepped away. By her later account, she was gone only a matter of minutes. When she returned, the boys were gone. The Atari display was empty. Adam was nowhere in sight. At first, there was still an obvious explanation. Maybe he had moved to another aisle. Maybe he had gone looking for her. Maybe he had become distracted. But as Reve searched the store, the possibilities began narrowing. Adam was not in the toy department. He was not waiting nearby. He was not where she expected him to be. And what Reve did not yet know was that, after she walked away, something had happened around that video game display. Something that may have changed the direction Adam took out of the store. Roughly 10 to 15 minutes after Reve left the toy department, a dispute reportedly broke out among the boys gathered around the Atari. Store security intervened. The group was broken up, and according to accounts that emerged later, some of the boys were directed out of the store. Adam appears to have been among them. There was one critical problem. The exit they were sent toward opened onto a different part of the parking lot from the area where Adam and his mother had entered. Think about what that means. Adam was 6. His mother had told him she would be nearby. Then an adult authority figure apparently moved him out of the store. He may have stepped into a parking lot he did not recognize, expecting to find his mother somewhere she was not. That security interaction would not become widely known to the public for years. It later emerged through litigation and subsequent reporting. But on July 27, 1981, Reve was simply searching for her son. Minutes passed, then more. store announcements were made. The mall was searched. And according to later accounts, Hollywood police were not notified until roughly 90 minutes after Adam was discovered missing. More time passed before an officer arrived. John Walsh, Adam's father, later described an early response that treated the disappearance as though the boy had probably wandered away and would eventually return. But Adam did not return, and the family soon discovered another problem, one much larger than a department store. In 1981, there was no coordinated national alert system capable of instantly pushing Adam's disappearance across the country. There was no federal requirement that every missing child case be entered into the FBI's National Crime Database. A child could disappear in one jurisdiction while authorities, somewhere else, had no automatic way of knowing they should be looking for him. The first 90 minutes were gone, and soon the search would become national. But the most important window may already have been closing. The Walsh family refused to let Adam disappear quietly. Flyers spread by the thousands. The reward climbed into 6 figures. Volunteers joined the search. Truck drivers helped relay information. Tips came in. The story reached the national press. But public attention has a short memory. By the second week, coverage was beginning to fade. The Walshes arranged an appearance on a national morning television program for August 11th, hoping to put Adam's face back in front of millions of people. They were still asking the country to help find a missing child. Then, the night before the broadcast, 2 fishermen stopped beside a canal near the Florida Turnpike. They saw something pale near the reeds. The same discovery from the beginning of this story. Investigators recovered human remains. Dental records and visual identification were used to identify them as Adam's. Years later, mitochondrial DNA testing would further confirm the identification through Reve Walsh. The search was over, but the case was not. The medical examiner's findings, as later reported, described injuries consistent with a bladed weapon roughly 5.5 inches long. The findings also indicated that Adam had likely died within a day or two of his disappearance. There had been no long period of hidden captivity, no child waiting somewhere to be rescued. The Walsh family held a funeral. The casket was closed, and from that moment forward, the central question changed. The country was no longer asking, "Where is Adam?" It was asking, "Who killed him?" The answer would take 27 years, and even then, it would not come from a courtroom.
For 27 years, we've been asking, who could take a 6-year-old boy and murder him and decapitate him? Who? We needed to know. We needed to know. And today we know. The not knowing has been a torture. But
in the early stages of a child homicide investigation, attention often turns toward people close to the victim. John and Reve Walsh were interviewed. According to reporting on the case, they were cleared through polygraph examinations. Then, investigators focused on a family friend. His name was James Dudley Campbell. Campbell had reportedly lived with the Walsh family at different times and had been involved in a relationship with Reve. Detectives examined him closely. One polygraph was inconclusive. A second came back clean. Eventually, Campbell was cleared, but accounts of the investigation have described the focus on him as continuing long after the evidence justified it. That mattered, because every hour spent forcing a weak theory is an hour not spent following another lead. Every month spent looking backward is a month in which evidence can disappear, memories can change, witnesses can move, records can be lost, and Adam's killer remained unidentified. In 1983, the Walsh family filed a negligence suit against Sears. The suit was later dropped, rather than risk exposing details of the still open criminal investigation through the legal discovery process. By then, The case had already begun accumulating something dangerous. Not answers. Names. Over the years, suspects came and went. One man, already imprisoned for a separate child abduction, was implicated after a fellow inmate claimed he had confessed. That lead collapsed. His employer placed him at work during the relevant period, and he later passed a voice stress test. Years later, another violent offender claimed knowledge of Adam's case and voluntarily provided DNA. It did not match evidence in the file. Each new name created the same temporary surge of hope. Maybe this was finally the person. Maybe this was the missing piece. Then the lead would fall apart. But in 1991, a name entered the story that was almost impossible to ignore. Jeffrey Dahmer. After Dahmer's arrest in Milwaukee exposed the scale of his crimes, investigators and the public began looking backward through his life. Where had he lived? Where had he traveled? What unsolved cases overlapped with his movements? And South Florida became relevant. Dahmer had been discharged from the army and was in the area around the period when Adam disappeared. Then witnesses came forward. Several people who had lived near Hollywood, Florida in 1981 were shown photographic arrays. They identified Dahmer as a man they remembered seeing near the Sears location that summer. It was an extraordinary possibility. One of the most notorious serial killers in American history, potentially near the place where a 6-year-old child vanished. But suspicion is not proof. Dahmer denied involvement. He was never charged in Adam's case, and unlike the murders he did admit to, there is no known detailed confession from him to Adam's killing. The case remained open, but police would not ultimately close Adam's file on Jeffrey Dahmer. They would close it on another man, a man who confessed, then took it back, then confessed again, and by the time police finally named him, he had already been dead for 12 years. His name was Otis Elwood Toole, a drifter, a convicted arsonist, a violent offender already serving time in Florida. In October 1983, more than 2 years after Adam disappeared, Toole contacted investigators. He confessed to the murder. At first, it sounded like the breakthrough the case had been waiting for. Then, the problems began. Parts of Toole's story did not match the known record. He described clothing inconsistent with the case. He implicated his longtime associate, Henry Lee Lucas, but records showed Lucas was incarcerated elsewhere at the time. Investigators confronted Toole. His story changed, and that pattern would become impossible to ignore. Confess. Recant. Confess again. Withdraw it. Return to it. Toole and Lucas would become notorious for claiming responsibility for enormous numbers of murders across the United States. Many of those claims were unreliable. Some were demonstrably impossible. So the existence of a confession, by itself, could not settle Adam's case. But then, investigators found something that should have mattered enormously. The car. Toole identified a vehicle he claimed had been used in connection with Adam's murder. Investigators obtained it. They treated the interior with a chemical process used to reveal possible traces of blood. They photographed the results. And then, according to reporting on the case, those photographs were never developed at the time. The potential physical evidence did not stop disappearing there. The vehicle was later sold. The carpet evidence was lost. Consider what that meant. A suspect had confessed. Investigators had located a car he said was connected to the crime. A test had apparently produced something significant enough to photograph, and the images were not developed. Then the physical material itself disappeared. Years later, there would be no clean forensic path back through that evidence. No courtroom could examine what no longer existed. No modern laboratory could retest material that had been lost, and so the case remained trapped between two possibilities. Otis Toole knew something only the killer could know, or Otis Toole was doing what he had done before, confessing to another murder that was not his. Before his death in a Florida prison in September 1996, Toole received a visit from his niece. She later stated publicly that he again affirmed his involvement in Adam's death, but Toole died without being tried for it. And for another 12 years, Adam Walsh's murder remained officially unsolved. In 2008, the Walsh family asked for the case to be reviewed again. Retired Detective Joe Matthews examined the file. Not a summary, not a handful of reports. Roughly 10,000 pages, decades of statements. Leads, suspects, confessions, contradictions, errors, lost opportunities, and after that review, the Hollywood Police Department reached its conclusion. In December 2008, 27 years after Adam disappeared, the department formally closed the case. Police named Otis Toole as Adam Walsh's killer. For the Walsh family, it was the closest thing the case would ever have to an official answer. But here is what closed did not mean. There had been no trial, no jury, no conviction, no confirmed forensic match definitively tying Toole to the crime. The suspect police named had been dead since 1996. The case was closed through departmental review, not through a verdict in court. Police Chief Chad Wagner apologized on behalf of the department for failures in the original investigation. And that distinction matters, because two things can be true at the same time. Police can believe, after reviewing the totality of a case, that one man was responsible, and the surviving evidence can still fall short of proving that conclusion beyond dispute. Officially, Adam Walsh's case is closed. Historically, Otis Toole is the man police named. But the ending is not the ending most people imagine when they hear the words, "Case solved." No handcuffs, no courtroom, no cross-examination, no sentence. Only a file closed 27 years later against the name of a man already in his grave. And yet, the most lasting part of Adam's story may not be the way the case ended. It may be what happened because it failed. In 1981, the Walsh family confronted a system that was not built for what had happened to them. A missing child could vanish into gaps between agencies. Information moved slowly. National coordination was limited. The failures surrounding Adam's disappearance became part of a much larger public reckoning. In 1982, the Missing Children's Act was signed into law, expanding the ability to enter missing child information into the FBI's National Crime Database. In 1984, John and Reve Walsh helped establish the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. In 1988, John Walsh began hosting America's Most Wanted, a program that would spend decades bringing fugitive cases into millions of homes. Then came one of the most visible pieces of Adam's legacy, a store-wide emergency response used when a child is reported missing. Employees act. Exits are monitored. The search begins immediately. The protocol has a name. Code Adam. It was named for him. And in 2006, the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act became federal law, expanding sex offender registration requirements. A 6-year-old boy entered a department store with his mother in July 1981. He never came home, but his name entered laws, police procedures, national institutions, retail emergency protocols, and the way an entire country thinks about missing children. Adam Walsh was 6 years old when he disappeared. Police eventually closed his case. A courtroom never did. Perhaps Otis Toole was the man responsible. That is the conclusion law enforcement ultimately reached. But the evidence left behind never produced the kind of final public test that a trial would have demanded. And maybe that is why this case still unsettles people decades later, because the file has an answer. But not everyone believes it has certainty. What is beyond dispute is what came after. The systems created in Adam's name changed the response to missing children across America. And every time a store activates a code Adam, his name is spoken again. The file is closed. The questions are not. This is Final Trace. The cases that do not end when the file closes.